Your brain is not fixed. It is a dynamic living structure that constantly changes in response to where you place your attention, what you repeat, and how you respond to experiences. This remarkable ability is called neuroplasticity, and more specifically, when you choose where to direct your attention and effort, it's referred to as self-directed neuroplasticity. Every thought, every focused effort, every intentional habit you cultivate literally reshapes your brain's wiring. This is not abstract. This is measurable, biological change. When you focus on yourself, on your goals, your behaviors, your mindset, you begin activating and strengthening neural pathways associated with motivation, planning, and emotional regulation. If you shift that focus outward, constantly checking what others are doing, comparing, getting distracted, those same pathways are weakened and circuits related to stress and anxiety begin to dominate. This isn't just about motivation, it's about architecture. Your brain molds itself according to the content of your attention. Most people don't realize that what they choose to focus on determines their future self. When you decide to focus on yourself until you win, you're engaging in a scientifically supported process of brain optimization. This means deliberately choosing thoughts and actions that reinforce your long-term vision rather than immediate gratification or external validation. This is how goals become habits and habits become traits. The more consistently you repeat a focused effort, whether it's writing, training, meditating, or learning, a corresponding neural circuit is strengthened. With repetition and focus, those circuits begin to fire more easily, eventually becoming automatic responses. This is why intentional self-focus isn't selfish. It's the foundation for growth, contribution, and mastery. At the cellular level, your neurons are literally sculpted by how you think and act. Self-directed neuroplasticity gives you the tools to build a brain that supports your values. Think of focus as the spotlight and your brain as the stage. Whatever you shine that spotlight on will receive more blood flow, more activation, more myelination, making those behaviors and thoughts more likely to reoccur. So if you're focusing on fear, failure, or other people's opinions, you reinforce neural loops that make anxiety and doubt more automatic. If you instead focus on your own process, your own recovery from setbacks, and your personal growth, you reinforce the identity of a resilient and capable person. Over time, your brain makes that identity more and more real, not through positive thinking, but through structural adaptation. You are quite literally building the neural foundation of winning, one focused effort at a time. Dopamine is often misunderstood as just the pleasure molecule, but in reality, it plays a far more critical role in motivation, learning, and goal-directed behavior. It is the neurochemical signal that tells the brain, this is worth doing again. It reinforces actions that lead to desired outcomes and helps encode those behaviors in memory. But here's the catch. Dopamine isn't only released when you achieve success. In fact, one of the most powerful ways to sustain motivation over time is to learn how to generate dopamine from the effort itself, not just the reward. When you focus on the process, when you begin to take pride in the grind, in the sweat, in the silence of early mornings and late nights, your brain starts to release dopamine simply because you're doing the work. And that's when real transformation begins. Too many people tie their motivation to external validation, a promotion, a trophy, a comment, a like, or even someone else's approval. But external rewards are fleeting, they're unpredictable, and they often leave you feeling empty once achieved. That's because the real dopamine reward system is meant to be internally regulated. When you celebrate small wins, when you acknowledge the fact that you got up early, trained hard, stuck to your plan, or overcame resistance, your brain reinforces the behavior that led to that internal satisfaction. This process is called reward prediction error encoding. When your brain experiences unexpected positive feedback from effort, it boosts dopamine even more, solidifying the motivation circuit. Over time, this builds the habit of showing up, not for applause, but because the showing up itself is the reward. Training your brain to love effort requires a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing challenges as obstacles, you begin to view them as opportunities for deeper engagement. Neuroscience shows that when people anticipate rewards tied to their own behavior, the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, the system that includes the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area, activates more strongly. This means that the more you associate effort with value, the more motivated you become. You start craving the process. You want to push because your brain understands that effort equals growth. This mindset doesn't eliminate failure or fatigue, it reframes them. It tells your nervous system, this is where change happens, keep going. Learning to generate dopamine from discipline is a superpower in a distracted world. It protects your focus, sharpens your intent, and gives you endurance. The ability to keep working even when there's no immediate payoff separates those who dabble from those who master. So if you want to win, not just once, but sustainably, you must train your brain to love the process. That begins by focusing on your effort, your internal victories, and your daily progress. When dopamine comes from within, motivation becomes consistent. And when motivation is consistent, success is just a matter of time. The concept of an internal locus of control is one of the most powerful psychological predictors of long-term success, mental well-being, and resilience. It refers to the belief that your own actions, behaviors, and decisions directly shape your outcomes. In contrast, an external locus of control means you believe that external forces, luck, other people, or circumstances are primarily responsible for what happens in your life. When you focus on yourself and cultivate an internal locus of control, you shift your brain's motivational systems from a reactive state to a proactive one. This shift activates specific neural circuits in the prefrontal cortex responsible for executive function, planning, goal setting, self-monitoring, and emotional regulation. These are the tools of mastery. When you truly believe that your outcomes depend on your efforts, your brain allocates more resources toward focus, grit, and perseverance. Psychologically, the internal locus of control increases your sense of agency. Agency is the belief that you can influence your environment, your responses, and your future. It is not about control over everything. It's about responsibility over your response to anything. This belief enhances resilience because even in the face of failure, you're not crushed. You interpret setbacks as part of the growth process, as feedback, not as a verdict on your worth. This mindset also reduces the stress response. Neuroscience research shows that individuals with an internal locus of control experience lower cortisol levels and are better at regulating the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. In simple terms, you don't panic as easily. You stay composed, you stay focused. Training yourself to develop an internal locus of control isn't abstract, it's behavioral. You start by identifying the things within your power every day. Your effort, your routines, your mindset, your reactions. By consistently acting on these elements, even in small ways, your brain begins to learn a new pattern. I am in charge of how I respond. And each time you act from this place, you reinforce neural circuits associated with autonomy and motivation. Over time, this changes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who's waiting for the right time or the right conditions. You become someone who acts regardless of the conditions. His identity is far more stable and far more powerful than relying on external motivation. When you adopt this mindset, something profound happens. You begin to generate momentum. Momentum doesn't come from winning once. It comes from believing that you have the power to keep improving. You start to enjoy the challenge because the challenge proves your strength. You stop chasing shortcuts because you no longer believe success is about luck or talent. You understand it's about direction, intention, and action. Your focus shifts entirely inward, not in a self-absorbed way, but in a self-selected way. You are no longer obsessed with how others are doing because you understand the only battle that matters is between the person you were yesterday and the person you're becoming. This is how you win, not just once, but over and over again. Because when you focus on what you can control, you build the neural and psychological foundation to keep evolving. No matter what, distraction is not just a lack of discipline, it's often the result of neurochemical misalignment. Your brain was not designed to constantly toggle between multiple streams of input, notifications, conversations, and comparisons. Every time you switch your attention, there is a measurable cost. This is called the switching cost in neuroscience. and it involves depletion of mental resources, loss of working memory capacity, and reduced efficiency in task execution. When you are constantly distracted by external stimuli, social media, news, other people's opinions, your attentional networks become fragmented. Specifically, areas like the anterior cingulate cortex and prefrontal cortex, which are responsible for focus and goal-directed behavior, are forced to work overtime. Over time, this leads to chronic fatigue, low cognitive endurance, and emotional instability. The result is not just lowered productivity, it's a lowered sense of purpose. Distraction also hijacks your reward system. Platforms that deliver frequent small bursts of novelty or validation train your brain to seek stimulation instead of depth. This leads to a state of dopamine dysregulation. Instead of receiving healthy, sustainable dopamine from meaningful work and consistent effort, your brain begins to crave the quick hit, the scroll, the like, the message, the escape. This is not a character flaw. It's a system-level response. But understanding this gives you power. When you decide to cut off these low-value sources of dopamine and instead engage in single-task, meaningful, focused work, your brain begins to recalibrate. It starts to rewire itself toward long-term gratification. Dopamine becomes aligned with effort again, not with distraction. So, one of the most effective ways to train focus is through intentional cognitive training. Sitting in silence, journaling, breath work, deep reading, or doing any task with zero interruptions. This is not just a productivity hack. These practices restore balance to your brain's attentional and reward circuits. They help the prefrontal cortex reestablish dominance over the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain. When the prefrontal cortex is strong, you're more likely to delay gratification, persist through difficulty, and choose what matters most over what's easiest. These aren't just habits. They are neural adaptations that create long-term resilience. When you constantly compare yourself to others, you're feeding a loop of self-doubt and inadequacy. This comparison loop activates the default mode network in the brain, which is associated with rumination and internal noise. Too much activation here leads to decreased self-esteem and reduced motivation. But when you focus on yourself, your own progress, your own rituals, you deactivate that network and engage your task-positive network, which improves goal clarity and emotional stability. This is why self-focus is so powerful. It doesn't just quiet the outside world. It quiets the inside world too. To protect your attention is to protect your future. Your focus is the entry point for everything meaningful you build. Your identity, your goals, your relationships, and your resilience. In a world built to scatter your mind, choosing to focus on yourself is not just an act of mental health. It's an act of rebellion, of strength, of creation. When you eliminate distractions and align your actions with what truly matters, your brain and body begin to operate in sync. Energy returns, clarity deepens, momentum builds, and slowly you start becoming the person you were meant to be, not by chasing everything, but by focusing on the one thing that matters most. Your own path stress, when understood and used correctly, is not your enemy. It's one of the brain's most powerful tools for adaptation and growth. Acute stress, the kind that arises from challenge, discomfort, or high stakes, activates a cascade of biological responses that sharpen your focus, increase alertness, and enhance performance. This is the fight or flight mechanism, regulated by the sympathetic nervous system and the release of cortisol and adrenaline. But what's often overlooked is that if you engage with this stress intentionally, meaning you stay present, lean into it, and work through it, your brain begins to change. Specifically, your prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making and emotional control, strengthens. The more you practice focusing under stress, the more capable you become of maintaining clarity when it matters most. This is called stress inoculation, and it's a scientifically proven way to build long-term resilience. Stress becomes harmful only when it is chronic and unmanaged. But if you deliberately place yourself in controlled stress scenarios, intense physical training, difficult cognitive work, public speaking, or disciplined routines, you are teaching your nervous system how to remain regulated under pressure. Over time, your stress response becomes more refined. You no longer react impulsively, you respond strategically. Your tolerance for uncertainty grows. You gain what neuroscientists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to adjust your thoughts and actions in response to new challenges. This is a hallmark of high performers in every field. They don't avoid stress, they leverage it. There is also a powerful link between stress and neuroplasticity. When you're under pressure, your brain becomes highly receptive to learning. The release of neuromodulators like norepinephrine and dopamine during stress heightens memory encoding, sharpens focus, and accelerates behavioral reinforcement. If during these moments you stay focused on your goal and act intentionally, your brain wires those behaviors in more deeply. This is how peak performers develop composure, speed, and precision, not in relaxed states, but in high-stakes moments where most people freeze. The brain doesn't grow through ease, it grows through overcoming. That's why leaning into stress, rather than avoiding it, is a core principle of personal transformation. It's also important to realize that your mindset about stress matters. Studies in neuroscience and psychology show that individuals who view stress as enhancing, not debilitating, have better health outcomes, improved performance, and lower cortisol levels. Your interpretation of stress directly affects your biology. When you tell yourself, "This is making me stronger," your body responds differently. Your heart rate increases, but your blood vessels stay relaxed. Your brain shifts into a state of readiness, not panic. This is not positive thinking, it's neurobiological reprogramming. Embracing stress doesn't mean seeking chaos, it means designing your life with intentional challenges that keep you sharp, grounded, and growing. Whether it's pushing through the final reps in training, tackling a difficult project, or maintaining discipline when motivation fades, each moment of controlled stress is a training session for your mind. With every repetition, you are hardening your focus, expanding your limits, and developing the mental grit required to win. So don't run from stress. Don't wait for everything to feel easy or perfect. Instead, step into the challenge, breathe through the tension, and remind yourself, this is how winners are built. Through the fire, through the pressure, and through the disciplined use of stress as a tool for evolution. Focus is not just a tool, it is the architect of identity. What you repeatedly pay attention to becomes the foundation upon which your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are built. This is because your brain's neural circuits are strengthened by use. The more you focus on something, the more your brain devotes resources to it. More blood flow, more synaptic firing, more myelination, and more long-term structural reinforcement. Over time, this shapes not just your skills, but your self-concept. You become the kind of person who trains, who reads, who builds, who resists distraction, who follows through. You don't simply do focused things, you become a focused person. This is not philosophy. It is the mechanism of neuroplasticity in action. Every choice of attention is a vote for who you are becoming. If your focus is scattered across distractions, other people's lives, entertainment loops, and social comparison, your brain begins to identify with passivity and reactivity. Your sense of self becomes disjointed, shaped more by the environment than your internal values. But if you consistently direct your focus inward, toward your goals, your routines, your thoughts, your improvements, you start to forge an identity aligned with growth. This consistent self-focus activates the brain's task-positive network, which enhances problem-solving, mental clarity, and emotional regulation. You begin to see yourself as someone with direction, as someone whose time and attention are too valuable to waste. There is a deep neurological connection between attention and memory. What you focus on, you remember. What you remember, you reflect on. What you reflect on becomes part of your story. In this way, focus doesn't just influence what you do, it literally writes the narrative of your life. If your attention is constantly hijacked by noise and distraction, your story becomes fragmented and externally driven. But when you take control of your attention, you reclaim authorship of your journey. You begin choosing what matters and giving it the mental and emotional energy it deserves. This process reinforces a sense of agency, which in turn deepens motivation, consistency, and identity alignment. When you focus deeply on a single goal over time, something powerful happens. You begin to sacrifice less meaningful distractions for more meaningful actions. This repeated act of prioritization builds integrity between who you are and who you aspire to be. You start seeing results, not just in external achievements, but in your mindset, discipline, and emotional stability. The small choices to focus, to stay with the discomfort of learning, to keep going when it's hard, to delay gratification, start to transform your character. This is not instant. It is the slow, deliberate work of identity construction done in the quiet spaces of everyday decisions, but it is lasting. It becomes who you are. In the modern world, focus is a superpower. It is the filter through which you shape your habits, your learning, your relationships, and your self-belief. The brain is always changing, and where you aim your attention determines the direction of that change. By focusing on your values, your mission, your inner growth, you activate the very systems that make excellence and fulfillment possible. You do not have to wait until you feel ready. You simply need to choose what to focus on, again and again, until that focus becomes you. And when it does, you won't just win once, you will keep winning because your focus will have built an identity capable of carrying success forward with strength and clarity.